Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Today, we have a very special guest, a friend, longtime friend, and also a Seedcamp alumni, Ricardo Sequerra Amram. Welcome, Ricardo. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Carlos?
Good. Well, guys, if you don't know much about Ricardo, he's going to tell us his story today. He's partner at Point9 at the moment, and he's got such big ambitions. I wouldn't doubt it if at one point in the future, you're running the world, Ricardo. So I want to hear all the story. How did you get to where you are today?
Thanks for having me, Carlos. It's great that we're finally doing this. I guess just to quickly start with my background, I'm Portuguese. I was born and raised in Lisbon. I studied here in a French school, which gave me the ability to learn languages from early on, which I believe has been really helpful throughout my life, not just career, also on the personal side of things. And after sort of a stint studying economics in between Lisbon, Buenos Aires, and Barcelona, and having worked for a couple of years in traditional finance industry, I spent some years in private equity, investing in transport infrastructure investments across Europe, so car parks, roads, airports, and the likes. I was salvaged by this small firm that had just moved to their new swanky office in Shoreditch in Google Campus. And that company was Seedcamp, which was sort of like my entry point into the early stage startup scene in Europe, which at the time was much smaller than it is today. I think it's crazy to think that this was in 2010, 2011. So we're looking at almost 10 years ago that we were together. Yeah, it's crazy.
It feels like 2 years ago.
It feels like yesterday. And yeah, I think back then you could get stabbed still in Shoreditch, and there were not that many baristas, there were not that many co-working spaces, and it was really a eye-opening experience to be able to see like the early days of companies like TransferWise and the likes, and the early days of Seedcamp, a small team. Still a small team, and learn a lot about the earliest stages of company building and get all of that exposure to the ecosystem as it was developing itself. That was really sort of like an eye-opening experience. So I have a lot to thank you, Reshma, Philip, and the rest of the team for that experience. And from there, I kind of learned that I needed to be inside the startup to really understand how it works. And when I meant startup, I really meant like early days, because that really was what I was really interested in. Right? Like I think that genesis of company building and that corpus of people that together can achieve much more than they would think individually they'd be able to achieve is really something that I was always very passionate about. And I think continuing throughout my career to remain in the seed stage. And so I joined Seeders, the equity crowdfunding marketplace, as sort of one of the first business employees, and spent a couple of years there doing the whole work around going to market, getting the initial traction, getting to the early signs of product market fit, raising a larger Series A round, starting to scale. And that was really an awesome experience to learn and seeing sort of the early days of the sort of fintech ecosystem flourishing in London.
With our good friend, Jeff Lynn.
Exactly. And Carlos Silva. And after that, I wanted to get more exposure to software and to software as a service. And from there, I moved to Faber, which is a sort of like early stage fund, but also a startup studio where a lot of the products were built in-house and launched. And there I was spending a lot of my time on go-to-market and figuring out those early signs of product market fit. And admittedly, I was not the most qualified to do that job, but I tried to learn as much as possible, reading a lot of Christoph's blogs, learning a lot from a distance from him.
I think you're too humble, man. I don't think any of us are really qualified to do this job. I think it's a constant job of humility, man. But yeah, Christoph is a source of authority, though. I mean, he's like the one outlier.
Exactly. We all learned from him a lot.
He was born with high midichlorians, that guy.
So I spent some years there, and curiously enough, the first time I had a touch point with Point9 was there because they invested in a company that we had built at the studio called Nom Nom. And that was also the first time I saw the impact that an investor could have on a company, not only at board level, but on a day-to-day business. And that's where I sort of decided to move from sort of being addicted to growth and to acquisition and that go-to-market part of early stage businesses to wanting to really be there on the support side of entrepreneurs throughout their journeys, not just maybe the idea of launching products, validating them, and then moving on to the next one, but really being part of a journey of an entrepreneur from the earliest stages up to hopefully one day seeing them either ring a bell at a stock market or being acquired and getting to a point of really like the epitome of success that we see in our industry. And that's what led me to move from London after 6 years or so in the city, which is a city that I love and that I visit ongoingly. As you know, I camp a lot at the Seedcamp office whenever I'm there, and joined Cherry Ventures, which is a VC firm, seed stage, based out of Berlin. And there I spent a lot of time thinking about software and thinking about marketplaces and investing in these businesses. And after a couple of years, I mean, and also a couple of co-investments with the Point9 team, I ended up joining the firm and ultimately saw a lot of sort of shared thoughts around how to continue supporting entrepreneurs and the types of companies and insights that we sort of wanted to put out there and invest in, and ultimately saw an awesome fit for me to join the firm and dedicate the next decades to continue doing what my partners at Point9 have been doing for the past 12 years. So this is how I got to Berlin and ultimately to Point9.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a great story, Ricardo. And as I said, when I kicked off, it's like, it's very rare that people can not only have that many experiences, but also being able to basically find the right people in the ecosystem to sort of go after and work with. So, I applaud that. It's like that level of vision and sort of execution on that. And, the good thing is that it's also giving you quite a broad level of exposure to different ways of doing things. We've been in this business long enough now that that people have different styles, and those styles can manifest themselves in the board level. It can manifest themselves in how you interact with peers and with founders and everything. And that's super great. And I want to jump into what those lessons are. But first, let's talk a little bit about what you're interested in now. And I know that, you call yourself a B2B investor. And obviously that means that you are some things for some people, and you're definitely not the right person to talk to for others. But walk us through why. Why, after you've been exposed to all the different variants, whether, at Cedars, you saw some D2C fundraising campaigns, at Faber and Cherry, you saw things like products like Nom Nom. And it's like, why now focus just on one specific area? Is it your choice? Is it the fun? Tell us why.
Yeah, I think after a couple of sort of initial years working with a variety of different companies and models, whether they were marketplaces on the B2C side, software or marketplaces on the B2B side, rather more consumer-oriented mobile businesses, I think I found my sweet spot in B2B, and B2B is a very wide-ranging spectrum of businesses. They can be software, they can be marketplaces, they can be many other things. Right? And ultimately understanding what technology can do for the world and what it can do for industries, I just felt very compelled by the opportunities of bringing technology, whether it's networks or software or anything in between, to the B2B spectrum. The idea of automating industries and markets through software and internet products was something that was super compelling to me, and thinking that looking at the way I interface with technology as someone that you can consider to be an early adopter of technology, and then seeing how industries worked and how effectively they were 10, 20 years behind the way I worked at Seedcamp or at Faber, but also the way I interface with technology from a consumer standpoint. I just saw that there was a huge opportunity to bring industries, right, like traditional industries, to bring outdated, antiquated industries to the 21st century by offering them technology that makes them work much more efficiently. And this is really where I think my passion lies, right? Like maybe I have colleagues in my team that are much better at looking at, opportunities that are maybe very horizontal, next generation design tools, next generation product tools, next generation tools for developers. I just find myself really passionate about the idea of helping that old traditional industry, that SMB or enterprise company that is stuck in the on-prem worlds, or not even, right? Like upskill themselves through technology. And whether it's, we can talk about industries further down the line, but whether it's restaurants, florists, veterinarian clinics, construction companies, factories, and the likes, it just feels like today adoption is effectively happening at a super accelerated pace across all of these industries that are still super underserved. And that's why I think
they're talking to each other in very clunky old school ways, paper in many cases, super slow sales cycles. And one chat that we were having before, you were talking about how you particularly love vertical SaaS software deals that can become marketplaces. And to some extent, it sounds like it's an extension of what you're just chatting right now. Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I think that, like the proliferation of software has been happening for decades and decades. And as behemoths on the horizontal software side of things are really gaining significant market share, we also see opportunity to penetrate markets by building really these industry-specific software solutions, and where you decrease the scope of the products that are being built and you increase the depth of the product that is being built. And if you think, for example, about Salesforce and their market share at about 20%, and to a certain extent, growth rates not accelerating, but rather to a certain extent decreasing. And then we see opportunities like Viva, right? Like in the CRM space with much more than 50% market share in the pharma industry. We do see that there's like really interesting opportunity to build industry-specific software solutions that really adapt to the core workflows, processes that an industry requires, and that are effectively built for purpose for such industries. And I think in the public markets, I mentioned Viva, but I think Procore is a great example. MindBody is a great example. All very different businesses, but great examples. And then I think in the Point9 portfolio, like I think my colleague Christoph, one of his first co-investments, I think it's actually the first co-investment with his partner Pavel, is a company called Clio, which is a practice management software for law firms in Canada. That really was sort of like one of the very first vertical SaaS solutions that we invested in. Since then, like the list has only increased with companies like Vend in the POS space in New Zealand, like Mambu in the cloud native backend for financial institution space. And then we've done a lot of things in health, in the hotel, hospitality space, in the renewable energy space, with dentists, with veterinarian clinics and the like. So, and restaurants. And so we just see that like this opportunity has been developing itself significantly. And in many cases, there were heuristics in the past that would claim that the opportunities or the TAMs related to these businesses were just too small and they were not attractive investments. And we've come to validate over the years that this heuristic is just incorrect. And it's probably become more incorrect over time, as we saw that these vertical SaaS businesses that were going to market with a SaaS go-to-market, charging probably SaaS revenue to their customers, expand their ACV over time with a multitude of opportunities, and to each their own, right? Like to each of these types of businesses, their own expansion opportunity. But what we see is that, for example, the opportunities brought by fintech and the ability to integrate fintech into existing products, right? Like has significantly increased the total addressable market of these products. And if you think about payments, just plugging in a simple Stripe API like enables really with significant ease, right? Like for businesses to suddenly provide an amazing expansion of their product to their customers. And with payments, is just sort of like the first low-hanging fruit in fintech. You can add insurance, you can layer in credit and financing solutions, you can add compliance as a service, banking solutions, and the list goes on and on and on. But that's just
with
one side.
With all these choices and all these broad sectors that are still to be disrupted, there must be some way that you curate the opportunities. And Point Nine is very well known for the SaaS napkin. And, it's a very good guide. If you don't know what the SaaS napkin is, you can just Google it, Christoph Jan's SaaS napkin. And, you guys put, as a firm, you guys put on the internet basically a way that people can get a sense of, how they're doing relative to the stage that they're in. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, I was chatting with Christoph earlier in this year, especially right after COVID hit, and we were talking about how 2020 will affect those numbers, mm-hmm. and whether that means that the contract values will go up and go down, and how any one investor might look at those. And I think at the time he was reluctant to say anything because, to be frank, I don't think anybody knew what the hell was going on. But now we look at the way that the stock market has taken off, and tech companies in particular have been better off because they're more resilient to some of the challenges of navigating during the times of COVID, because software is software. And I'm curious now, like, what is impressive in a company? What is, from a metrics point of view, something that would get your attention at the Point Nine? Like, is it, early traction, or is it the prospect of a certain annual contract value size? What are the fundamentals there that really sort of catch your attention? Yes,
good point. I think that we're called Point Nine for a reason, and I don't think a lot of people know, but the reason why we're called Point Nine is we like to invest in products before the 1.0 version, and in businesses before they launch the 1.0 version. So we're more than used to investing in businesses that don't have all the ingredients for us to formalize what the business will look like in 5-10 years, but enough that we can build hypotheses, and enough that we can effectively build a thesis around, if the business achieves X, Y, and Z, then this looks like a really awesome opportunity. And like we invest from pre-revenue to already with a decent chunk of revenue. Our investment check size today ranges from 500K to 3 million, which enables us to cover a pretty wide range of what seed has become these days. And like for some businesses, having a clear understanding of how expansion of contract value will look like is maybe enough. For others, wanting to see some handful of customers or some traction in the market is also something that gets us excited. I think there's no one size fits all for Point Nine. I think it also depends a lot on the opportunity, the business, the industry you're going after, because the adoption and the way we think about the go-to-market and the way we sort of work alongside the founders the moment we invest is in a very collaborative way, a work of discovery and a work of like embarking on a journey to get to product market fit. So I think that a good example is a company that we recently invested in called PetsApp, where what they're effectively building is a software solution for veterinarian clinics, and there we saw that there's clearly an opportunity to monetize based on software, but ultimately down the line, a lot of these fintech opportunities could be achieved. But then again, right, like there was more expansion of that ACV through potentially a B2C marketplace, or capturing more of the B2C, expenditure in pet care, which is just absurdly enormous. And ultimately that gave us the conviction, despite not seeing any traction there, but just understanding what the business could become if they achieve these adjacent revenue opportunities, for us to get super excited and want to work with the team. I think that ultimately that's how we think about like understanding what these adjacencies of the initial, bit product and revenue model that the business is running at the point at which we invest, that then ultimately enable us to build a thesis and work alongside founders to validate those additional revenue streams.
If I take that example, example PetSap, and others like it, and I create a, you can subdivide things across a spectrum, across multiple infinite ways. But I'm going to take three independent points in a sort of spectrum, and I'm going to give you the two bookends and the polar one. And I'm going to ask you, which one do you think tends to do better of that spectrum, and which one do you think 0.9 seems to favor? So, on the one hand, there's a post your colleague Christoph wrote about elephants versus flies. Mm-hmm. Elephant contract sizes, huge contract sizes, large ACVs, maybe very slow sales cycle. And then flies, it's like tons of customers maybe paying $1 each. You have, if you can make $1 million, you can make $1 million both ways, right? You can have $1 million contract, or you can have 1 million people paying $1. They're both worth $1 million, right? Mm. And then there's this new type of company, and I would put maybe PetSap in this category. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to explain why I think it fits into this category. It's because it's like a sandwich. It's got multiple layers of revenue, right? It's not only just the original subscription software, but then there's an additional element that's added here, an additional element that's added here. And so you have these layers of revenue, which compounded means that there is a larger ACV for maybe a particular practice or veterinary practice, rather than just the software license alone. And so in that spectrum, which one do you think historically tends to do better? And then which one do you think you guys tend to prefer? Like this sort of, and it's constantly shifting, but it's, you look at some of the software that's like low license fees, but many users, mm-hmm. versus large ones like UiPath with like these larger. I'm just trying to get a sense for where do you think that spectrum sits in terms of definition?
I think it's difficult to generalize, because whether we're talking about vertical SaaS or whether we're talking about horizontal SaaS, there's differences in the way you build that strategy, and potentially you build that layer, right? Like I think heuristic, again, bringing heuristics into the discussion, right? Like traditionally you want to run fast and your product doesn't serve the enterprise, and you start with SMBs, and over time you build up the product and the go-to-market motion to be able to attract higher ACV type deals. I think that in the case of vertical software, it again depends as to whether you're going to be doing SaaS expansion and you're going to be bringing more and more of the software suite used by that specific customer into your own product, and you're going to basically compete against whatever the payroll, the CRM, whatever are the other pieces of software that particular business is using. And you're going to basically incorporate them all into your product and capture more and more of ACV expansion. But if you're doing fintech, that's a different type of revenue stream. It's not a SaaS revenue stream. It becomes then much more of a financial revenue type opportunity. If you're then layering in a marketplace, a network type opportunity, which is the case with many of our B2B marketplaces that start with a SaaS and then ultimately layer an opportunity to build a network and become even more sort of sticky and retained and become really core part of a procurement process inside such a business, then that's a whole different type of revenue stream, more related to GMV and transaction take rate, right? So it's difficult to give you exactly a sense. And then what is it that 0.9 prefers? I mean, we've invested in businesses from flies to elephant hunters, right? And I think that's something that throughout the years, I think we it's not that we favored one versus another. We've continuously get excited about working with businesses of all types of go-to-market, chasing different types of what Christoph calls the animals. So I think that like it's us understanding how the
puts a new spin on what's your spirit animal, right?
Yeah, we need to get something new out from a content point of view around our spirit animals. But again, right? Like I work with companies targeting small ACVs. I work with companies targeting like large ACVs in the enterprise space. I think these are different go-to-markets, of course, but we remain generally attracted to working with all these types of entrepreneurs.
In this last answer you gave me, you started off by talking about how a company can expand, right, from like an early part to multiple other things, and sometimes in that expansion there's a change in the go-to-market, right? Like it goes from like a SaaS subscription to now a different form of partnership or a different type of sale, in order to be able to sort of expand that. And the key thing that makes this happen is the team, right? Like if you have a team that cannot transform and expand that, you basically stunted with the original version that you got pitched. You didn't expand beyond that original vision. It just kind of got stuck there because the team. So how do you guys, especially with a lot of these businesses that are getting bigger and bigger in terms of their vision and scope of being able to software eat the world, so to speak, how do you guys think about a team as good or bad or as appropriate for that kind of evolution in the company?
Yeah, and I think an interesting insight, right? Like in terms of founder DNA that we look for, be it in vertical SaaS and in B2B marketplaces, right? Like which are industry specific businesses, right? Like is that we look for founders that have significant domain expertise, that have spent years in the industry before effectively deciding to jump ship and fix the problems that they were exposed to for so many years through technology, right? And I think that having these types of founders building such businesses really enables them to very instinctively understand the buyer of the product that they're building and very instinctively conduct a sale, right? Like and these founders, like ultimately at the beginning, it's them doing all sales, and gradually over the period at which we invest, we work with these founders to help them onboard the first AEs and transpose the superpowers that founders have at selling their own products to other people. That's a huge win typically when the first AEs get to quota, and we can say that like it's not just you that can sell your product, but it's also the sales team. But then over time, and especially if ACVs start growing and you've built a go-to-market team that is targeting ACVs of in the tens of thousands, and then you need to target in the hundreds of thousands or in the millions, you need to bring DNA that is then catering the enterprise sales cycle and the enterprise go-to-market. And this is something that may happen much further down the line, right? Like post A, post B, depending on the depth of the SMB market for that specific segment. But it's really important to then upskill the DNA of your go-to-market team and bring enterprise talent, because it just becomes very different type of go-to-market at that point.
Yeah. In terms of go-to-market, part of it obviously comes down to the product being fit for purpose. And what you guys are very well known for is, being quite discerning about what makes a good product, especially what makes a good SaaS product. Is there any, I know that you hate generalizations in some way. It's very hard to have a conversation without picking either on a specific company, but if you had to make generalizations about when you get the feeling that, wow, this is an amazing product, even at the 0.9 stage, and I use it in the earlier than 1.0 stage, what is it about that product?
Yeah, I mean, that really is what gets us super excited, right? Like being able to see a product that really fits a very specific need in the market, that even if it's built super roughly, it already exposes the needs that the founder has identified. And I think that like a magical moment throughout our due diligence is when we're going through the product with the founder and he is explaining us why he built such feature first and why exactly is it that this particular part of the product is important as for the prototype, and why he didn't build the other feature and why he didn't build the other feature. And that's where the clarity of thought and the insight that was generated throughout years of industry experience comes out, right? Like, because there's so much to build, right? Like, there's really so much to build. And typically, if you think about it, these founders are founders that come from industry. It's not like they are product manager genius. They have product expertise at building technical problems, but they do have that insight. They do have that clarity of thought of the problem is X, and these three particular features that I put as part of my prototype are really essential for me to start developing the business and selling to the target customers that I need to go after. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where our eyes typically shine. And then if on top of that, there's some magical usage that corroborates the clarity of thought expressed by the founder. And it doesn't need to be 100 businesses using it. It's just a couple. And that already sort of enables us to, yet again, build that product market fit experiment that we are keen to back over the next 18 months and run alongside the founders as an extended part of their team to get them to product market fit, which is really our ultimate value proposition to the businesses and founders that we decide to partner with for the next years.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. It gives me good visibility on kind of what you guys are looking for, but actually it does another thing as well, Ricardo.
Tell me.
If I were a founder and listening to this, you know, what I sense every time I speak to you, it's like there's this passion that you have towards this, not only this industry, but this sort of relationship with founders. It's truly like visible and palpable. So, you know, it's like if I had to raise money, you know,
you'd raise with us.
Of course, I'm conflicted here because but you know what I mean, Ricardo, you would be up there on the list for me. And you know, we always like to end with a question to give you maybe a non VC related question, but you know, just the insight into kind of what your thinking is outside of work, whatever.
Yeah.
And, it's a question a little bit maybe reflective and philosophical about what's going on in the world today. And if you look back, you know, in history, a lot of bad things happened, and we look back today to them and think, oh my God, how did we let that happen? If we look 50 years into the future and we look back today, not 2020 specifically, but just, you know, today's era, in the future, what will we be looking back at and thinking, how the hell did we let that happen?
Interesting one. I think that like the biggest problem that we have in the world of today is our addiction to technology, right? Like we've unleashed and opened up the gates and ultimately have, to a certain extent, got to a point where, you know, the way we're addicted to our phones, the way we're basically finishing up our dinner and clicking Netflix and opening up Netflix and spending our time binging content. Technology allows so much, but at the same time, we forgot to put the brakes on the products that we've built. We forgot that, you know, the moment your dopamine kicks only come out of the rich media that comes out of your phone, reading a book is no longer something that satisfies your brain, right? Like that's a problem, right? Like and I think about it a lot as I see friends and family starting to have kids that are starting to interface with technology. I mean, I think as someone born in '89, I probably was one of the last generations to have lived my childhood in an analog world, right? Like I had my first smartphone at age 20 or so. I really didn't have Wi-Fi at school, right? Like I had to go to a library and Google on a PC, Pentium 3 type of situation. And I think kids today are exposed to technology from day one, and they want to be YouTubers, and they spend their time looking at YouTube and other media channels. And I think that it's fine. I think the technology brings awesome opportunities of learning, of democratization of access, of ultimately the ability to learn on their own and become much more than the surroundings that they're exposed to. But we forgot to, it feels that we forgot to add the brakes, right? Like, and we forgot to add some gates. And I think one of the important things that we'll look at is just like 50 years from now, we'll look at the way, I actually hope we look at the way we've been consuming our phones rather than looking at the people in front of us, or just giving an iPad to a kid so he shuts up for a while. Those are the easy fixes, right? Like, and ultimately in 50 years, I hope that we fix this problem whilst still keeping the beauty of what software and the internet have given to the world. So I think our role as investors in this case is really to be able to build and finance the businesses that are bringing these additional layers that the internet and doesn't have today, right? Like, yeah. and I think that this is a huge challenge for the world of the future, because then we might all become very easily distracted by the technology and the digital world that we have, and we forget the beautiful world that we have outside of our screens.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a major transformation that needs to happen. So I saw in the news today that one local UK town is taking a commercial mall, and because a lot of the malls have now sort of imploded because, you know, of internet shopping, that they're now going to turn it into a green space. So I see it's funny, for as much as like I look at some dystopian tendencies of our society, I also see some trends that people are like, especially COVID, I think has been a wake up call for people, you know, like nature matters, you know, being outside matters, being close to family matters. So I think you're onto something, Ricardo. I think we should back a deal together that
really hope so.
All that. And
really hope so.
Really enjoyed having you and chatting with you, Ricardo. Always a pleasure. I can't believe it's been 10 years. That's insane.
It's crazy.
And
it's been a while since I visited you in London. I look forward to that day. I look forward to the days where we can all see each other face to face, as opposed to in digital screens and mediums 100% of the time. Right?
Crazy, but soon.
Thank you for having me.
Guys, see you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Carlos.